大家好，我是宙斯，请大家关注我呀。三体系列等风声不紧了还会继续更，现在什么都发不了。6月份《龙之家族》第2季即将开播，先插播一些龙家和全游相关内容，也都是我非常喜欢的剧集。今天给大家首先带来的是一个外网评论视频，主要是吐槽龙家第1季的人设问题，内容都是原视频博主观点，我100%复刻，70%认同。视频后面我附上英文原版，英文好的同学可以直接跳到12分50秒处观看。House of the Dragon, let's start. 首先剧集是好的，是的，和全游一样有很多黄色片段，毕竟是 HBO 嘛，好像 HBO 觉得他们有义务演奶和屁股，所以就有很多奶和屁股，主要有2集这样的镜头比较多，还有很多血腥的生产场景，不知道为什么编剧们好像特别热衷于生孩子的血呼啦吃的场面，这一季就有5次生孩子。这一季里面最好看的还是政治斗争，也就是不同角色之间争夺权力的故事。其实全游原片也是权力斗争的部分最好看，全游里面的魔法成分反而是我认为最差的，所有和北方异鬼相关的故事都很没意思。全游里面有龙，但是戏份不是很多，除了丹尼利斯也就是龙妈她会骑龙，这一点比较重要。魔法的成分还有梅丽珊卓，但是她对故事的走向也没有发挥太大的作用。剧情中最有意思的还是各大家族之间的斗争，基本上就是一场玫瑰战争吧。龙之家族里呢就没有那么些魔法了，主要就是家族内战，这是我所喜欢的。很多人说龙家小气，规模比全游的故事小很多，这不假，但是我并不介意。我对龙家最不满的就是角色前后严重不一致，主要就是因为这一季的剧情从中间直接撕成了2半，还换了演员。问题在于故事从太早的时间点开始讲了，如果从角色都成年之后再开始讲的话会更好，因为现在的安排角色的前后差距太大了。比如雷尼拉公主，第1集的她和最后一集的她简直就是2个人，第1集的阿里森和最后一集的阿里森也不是同一个人，第1集的戴蒙和最后一集的戴蒙也不是同一个戴蒙。想要剧集的人物之间互动冲突，在相对长的时间线上产生有意思的交集，那他们每一个人都得有一个一以贯之的人格和秉性。你可能会说这是因为剧集的时间跨度太长了，人是会变的，这么说没问题，人确实会变，但是剧集就是没有处理好。你看全游就好很多，乔弗里就是乔弗里，他不是从一个好青年变成了万人恨，他一直都很坏。奈德史塔克一直就是品德高尚，但是很迂腐，他们的人设是一以贯之的。还有罗伯一直是英勇但是天真的少郎主，他们每个人的主要性格都可以用一句话就说出来。龙之家族最大的问题就是没有做到这一点，基本上所有人都变来变去，唯一例外的就是由 Paddy Considine 饰演的维赛里斯一世。Paddy Considine 也是奉献了全剧最佳演技，其他的人的人设都是乱的。先说戴蒙坦格利安，确实演员 Matt Smith 非常有魅力，演得也很好，特别吸睛，但是戴蒙的人设说不通啊。一开始韦塞里斯一世刚降生的儿子死了，王后也没了，戴蒙应该是高兴的，因为这使他成了王位继承人，他是想要权力的，他最想要的就是权力，他去打仗也是为了得到王权，但他打仗打赢了回去之后根本就没有挑战兄长，反而对他俯首称臣。当然他和他哥哥之间有爱恨交织的感情，这没有毛病，但是他又想当国王又不想当国王，想要权力又不想要权力，到底是怎么着呢？更奇怪的是他还对侄女也就是琳拉公主也俯首称臣了。他更年长，而且特别能征善战，他也自认为自己很强。侄女雷尼拉在当女王之前没有表现出什么过人的可以当君主的素质，她唯一的资本就是她是国王的女儿，也就是她的公主身份。实际上雷尼拉很不讨人喜欢，年轻的雷尼拉就是荷尔蒙过量的青少年，不负责任。韦塞里斯一世老是跟他说，你有你想做的事情，也有你得做的事情，你得做的事情还是得做呀。那他呢还是说我想干嘛就干嘛，他跟叔叔一块去逛妓院，跟他瞎搞，还跟他的卫队长上床，这都是女王不应该做的事情。大家想想，一个君主应该有什么品质？他可以说是一样都不占。然后呢，到了这一季的最后，他突然又变成了好女王，是不是？虽然他已经自己严重损害了作为继承人的正当性，但是他加冕之后呢，又当女王当得很好。他之前嫁给瓦列利安家族的同性恋丈夫，和一个姓斯壮的白人生了一堆孩子，不是1个孩子是3个。插一句，这里用黑人演员演瓦列利安家族也有问题，因为根本就说不过去，根本不存在蒙混过关的可能性。这孩子一看就不对啊，所有人都看得出来他没有瓦列利安血统。难道所有人都是傻子吗？这么明晃晃的就生这些孩子是婚内生的，这让雷尼拉的处境非常难堪。她一直在做错误的决定，但是后来当了女王突然就好了，就成了好女王，就想着怎么把国家团结起来，把自己的责任很当回事。 那剧里面前面很少有地方告诉我们雷尼拉原来是一个有责任感的人呀，所以中间跨过的时间就成了一个问题。那你如果跟我们讲过渡也行啊，比如说父亲的死让他变了，或者是一开始就从他成年之后开始演，不要演他小的时候，这样可能会好一点。现在演的他一开始根本就是个不负责任的人，他嫁给了自己的叔叔，这里面有些剧情是剧集生加进去的，原著里本来没有的，都是为了美化雷尼拉。比如她原来的丈夫兰诺尔在书里是被快速的处理掉了，但在剧集中改成了和他的同性恋人一起远走高飞了。在古代的王室根本就不可能发生这样的事情，就是很扯淡。而且戴蒙也不应该同意他这么做呀，戴蒙是剧中最狠心的人之一，但他却允许这对同性恋人逃走，就很奇怪。雷尼拉的转变就说不通，与之对应的就是阿丽森的转变也说不通。年轻时候的阿丽森是 Emily Carey 演得很好，后期是 Olivia Cooke 演得很好，但这两个人根本就不是同一个人。阿丽森年轻的时候遵守道德要求，重视责任，和雷尼拉形成了对比。雷尼拉就是一意孤行，情绪化，阿丽森就完全听父亲的话。其实从很多方面来说，他比雷尼拉都更适合当摄政王后。雷尼拉这个人不可预测，很情绪化，做很多莫名其妙的事。阿丽森呢会为国家考虑，去陪伴维赛里斯一世，是他承担了很多责任。他16、17岁就被迫嫁给45岁的老国王，其实有点恶心，为了延世王室血脉给他生孩子。而维赛里斯一世还一直保留着雷尼拉的王储地位。按说他为了团结全国的话，应该废除雷尼拉，重新立伊耿为储，但他就不，为什么呢？剧里面也没说清楚，咱也想不通。说回阿里森，他很无辜的被父亲推到这个位置，到了剧集的下半段又突然变成了全剧最坏的人之一，精于心机恶毒。他做那些坏事又变成了只是为了让自己的孩子坐上王座好保命，而不是为了团结国家，或者是觉得自己的孩子当国王更好，就是因为害怕雷尼拉杀了自己的孩子。但是他了解雷尼拉呀，而且还在最后的时候和雷尼拉讲和，他知道雷尼拉不是残暴的人，所以他前面为什么要这么做都说不通。他还变得很腐败，和拉里斯搅的那个事情让人难以接受。他本来是个勇敢的、有责任心的，为了自己的家族或者国家敢于承担责任的人，后来变成了一个精于心机的坏人。而且他的孩子都是熊孩子，也不知道怎么的，只要雷尼拉生的孩子就都是好孩子，阿里森的孩子都是熊孩子，这就很奇怪，因为看上去阿里森管孩子比雷尼拉管得多呀。再说瓦列利安家族，剧集里好像说本来应该是雷尼斯公主去当女王，而不应该是维赛里斯一世。因为雷尼斯有种种好的品质，他会战略性的思考，头脑很清醒，好像是这个意思。但是雷尼斯又一直在干一些只是为了方便编剧的事儿，比如第9集最后他7龙掀翻了地面，死了得有1000多平民吧。但是呢，他又不直接把绿党烧死，结束战争，这为什么呢？好吧，他自己说战争不该由他发起，但战争都得结束吧。他为什么不结束战争呢？他怎么做是比较合理的呢？他是有理由或者有权去继承王座了，而且他有一头巨龙，而且全国上下就他自己知道王位已经被篡夺，理论上他可以把绿党烧死，然后去找她丈夫一起去争取他本来应得的王位。但是他是怎么做的呢？他是去找雷尼拉向他称臣，这是为了什么呢？为了他的孙子们吗？但他明知道这些孙子和他没有血缘关系啊，就很奇怪。海蛇也是，剧集一开始的时候他野心勃勃，想要染指王位，还和戴蒙一起去打仗，就是为了分散国王的王权，可到了最后他又向雷尼拉俯首称臣了，说不通啊。再加上他们夫妻俩都觉得是雷尼拉害死了他们的儿子，烧毁了他的尸体，怎么还会向他俯首称臣呢？还有克里斯顿·科尔，我知道编剧想让我们讨厌他，因为他神经病，是个坏人，可是他可是被雷尼拉虐过的，那我们就得视而不见，因为雷尼拉是大女主呀。科尔就活该被利用，他讲究美德，讲究道德，我们就该认为他是个坏人。少数观点我也得说呀，一开始有问题的不是科尔，而是雷尼拉。当然后来科尔也确实有问题了，那他说雷尼拉多么多么的坏，他说的 95% 都是对的呀。还有奥托海塔尔，一开始就是善于操纵的首相，说他权力愈强，但是一开始他的动机不是权力，是他说团结国家需要一个男储，所以让女儿嫁给国王，生下儿子要改立男储，后来又变成了自己想要权力，自己想要染指王位，这中间是什么时候变的也没有说。这种角色前后不一致比比皆是，你就很难真正支持哪个角色。戴蒙、雷尼拉、阿里森的人设都变了，前后一致的只有韦赛里斯一世，毕竟他一直就很无为嘛。这些都是问题。终于到了剧集的最后，伊蒙德很明显这个王子一直准备想当国王，学哲学学历史什么的，他还是个狠人，不经任何人的允许就自己擅自驯服了一条巨龙，当然他还有个很酷的眼罩。 他去拜拉席恩家寻求支持，雷妮娜的儿子路斯利斯，也就是小路也去了，也是去找拜拉席恩家，让他们在战争中站他们家一边。伊蒙德见到小路就很生气，因为他的眼睛就是他弄瞎的，他就嘲弄小路，追他追到外面，后面又骑着龙追。这里面就有个很大的问题，书里面没有说得很明白，但这里的呈现明显是有问题的。首先从人物秉性上看，为两个比较适合继承王权的就是杰卡里斯和伊蒙德。伊耿二世虽然是老大，但他是个烂人，也不想当国王，第二季很快就会领盒饭的。小路继承王位的说服力也不大，因为他是老二，而且是私生子。那他哥哥杰卡里斯其实也是私生子。伊蒙德实际上是很有可能争取到王位的，他学习很努力，也很能打，也很聪明，也比较克制，不会骄奢淫逸。那他到了这个地方呢，突然又变得很暴怒。正常的话，他应该是比较有城府的一个人，有自己的算盘。按照当时的发展局势，他是不太可能正常的当上国王的。那他要想当国王的话，就需要战争，需要混乱，他才可能有机会，不然轮不到他。那怎么引发战争呢？就是把多年前弄瞎他眼睛的这个小路给杀掉，这样就可以引发大乱，可能创造自己登上王位的机会。所以他应该是很冷静的、很决然的干掉了小路才对。这样的话，观众一方面觉得哎这个人真坏，一方面呢也会有些喜欢他的心机和心狠手辣。但是剧集的呈现就很奇怪，演的是两头龙想打架，但是两个人都不想打。小鹿想控制自己的龙，不要去攻击伊蒙德的龙，但是呢他控制不了，所以说他的龙喷了伊蒙德的龙一口火焰。伊蒙德的大龙呢回头一口就把小鹿和他的小龙都吞了。伊蒙德又说哦 no no， 他干嘛哦 no no 呀？这不符合他的性格呀。他现在又突然觉得不能杀死自己的家人了吗？什么时候又变得这么善良这么温柔了？总体来说，龙之家族的第一季最起码的我们需要有清晰的人物性格吧，你得让观众知道这些角色到底是什么样的人，他们为什么会做那些事吧。本来解决的办法是可以从主要角色成年开始讲故事，也就是从现在第一季中间的时间线开始讲，后面再穿插解释一些戴蒙曾经也想要王位啊，再回忆一下伊蒙德的眼睛之前是小鹿弄瞎的呀，穿插着讲一讲这些背景就可以了。因为本来第一季的目的就是为了给后面的大战讲设定，给后面的大战叙事，从角色成年之后开始讲完全没有问题。那现在的安排从他们年少时就开始讲故事，中间又突然跨过了好些年，还换了一半的演员，本来前面观众对人物建造的感情就突然断了，之后这些角色的人设又跟之前完全不一样了，主要就是因为剧本写烂了，写的简单而随意，老是强行让角色从这个问题里跳出来，又引发另一个问题，比如雷尼斯为什么不直接烧死绿党呢？完全说不通。为什么要从地底下突然冒出来害死那么多平民？就是因为这样很拽很酷很好看吗？剧本实在是写得太烂了，人物和剧情缺乏内在联系，就更像是全游第5季的水平，而不是第1季的水平。全游的第1季有马丁的整体架构，就写得很工整，龙家第1季就很多是编剧自己弄的，这里一枪那里一炮的，很多桥段都很白痴，没有内在逻辑。整体上如果5分的话，给打 3.5 分，本来可以拍成个5分，但是没有做到。
Enjoyable. First of all, let's get to the obvious. Yes, it's filled with pornography. It's Game of Thrones. I mean, it's on HBO. HBO has a moral obligation, apparently, they believe, to show tits and ass, and so they just do that a lot. It actually is almost wholly relegated to like 2 episodes. There's a lot of bloody childbirth. I don't know why the writers were super into bloody childbirth, but there's like 5 of them during the season. So that was weird. The upside of the show is that it's all political manipulation. So that's stuff that's fun to watch, right? You're watching all of these characters vie over power. That was always the best part of the original Game of Thrones. The touch of magic in the original Game of Thrones was, I thought, the weakest part of the show. Everything that was going on with the White Walkers in the North was the least interesting part of the show. The dragons were there, but they weren't really a major topic, except for Daenerys having one. Melisandre was there, but she actually had very little impact on the show itself. The part that was always really interesting was the battle between the houses. Because it was essentially the War of the Roses. So here in this show, they really dispense with a lot of the magic, and it's just internecine warfare in the house. Well, I'm really into that. I like political dramas in which it's essentially a closed box. A lot of people are complaining the show's claustrophobic. It doesn't have the same sort of scope as the original Game of Thrones. And all of that's true, but it doesn't bother me too much. The biggest problem that I have with the show is the wild character inconsistencies. So to me, a lot of this is rooted in the decision to essentially split the season in half and then recast the season. So they start the story too early. Okay, the reality is that they really should start this story when everybody is an adult, because the gap between the characters and how they are from the beginning of the season to the end of the season is pretty wild. Like Rhaenyra at the beginning of the season is not who Rhaenyra is at the end of the season. Alicent at the beginning of the season is not who Alicent is at the end of the season. Daemon at the beginning of the season is not who Daemon is at the end of the season. And if you are going to put these chess pieces on the board and then move them around in conflict with one another and develop some sort of interest in the characters over the long term, they have to have a consistent character. And I suppose you can make the argument that because the show takes place over a long period of time and people change and all this, that, that's not inaccurate about human nature, but that is a problem in the show. When you watch the original Game of Thrones, Joffrey is Joffrey. There's no point at which Joffrey was a generous young man who turned into the world's worst human being. He was just bad. Ned Stark was always virtue-laden but thick, right? Like, their characters were who they were. Robb was always, brave, bold young prince who's naive about the world. Like, you could name who they were in sort of one sentence. The big problem with House of the Dragon is that except for Viserys, who's pretty consistent and played by Patty Considine, who actually gives the best performance in the show, everybody else is all over the place. So let's start with Daemon Targaryen. And so Matt Smith is magnetic on screen. He's terrific in the show. Also, Daemon Targaryen's character makes no sense. So he starts off, he's happy that Viserys has a boy who dies and that his wife dies because it presumably makes him heir to the throne. So he wants the power. It's the thing that he wants the most of all. He wants the power. He goes and he fights a war specifically in order to gain the power. And then when he comes back, he doesn't challenge his brother in any way. He sort of bends the knee to his brother. So he has this love-hate relationship with his brother, but he wants to be king, but he doesn't want to be king, but he wants to have the power, but he doesn't want to have the power. And him sort of bending the knee to his niece is particularly weird because he's way older than she is, and he thinks of himself as a war fighter, whereas Rhaenyra demonstrates very few qualities up until she becomes queen that actually make her worthy of being queen, other than she's the daughter of her father. In fact, she's wildly unlikable. Young Rhaenyra is a hormonal teenager who refuses to abide by the duties of her job. Viserys keeps saying, like, there's what you want to do and there's what you need to do. And these are not the same thing. And she's like, well, I want to do what I want to do. And this means I'm going to go with my uncle to a brothel and get felt up by him. And it means that I'm going to have sex with my Knight's Guard dude. This is not the behavior that you would want from your queen. Like, if you're going to name all the characteristics you want in a ruler, she embodied virtually none of them. And then by the end of the show, just stick with Rhaenyra for a second. By the end of the show, suddenly Rhaenyra is really good at queening. Right? Rhaenyra is given the crown, and despite the fact that she has dramatically undermined her own credibility, she's amazing at it, right? So she marries her husband, Valerian, who is gay, and then she has a bunch of kids, not just like one kid with a white dude named Strong. She has like 3 kids with that dude. This is one of the problems, by the way, with casting the Valerians as black, is it destroys all semblance of plausible deniability for Rhaenyra, right? There's no way she can claim, well, it really is legit. Like, everyone can see the kid's not legit. Everybody can see that the kid is a Strong. Like, what, you think everyone around you is unbelievably stupid? Like, the arrogance that it would take to sire a child of the color that is not your husband's and then claim them as legitimate heir is really astonishing, right? And puts Viserys in a really bad position. So Rhaenyra is constantly making bad decision after bad decision up until the point she becomes queen. And then she becomes queen, and suddenly she's amazing at this. Suddenly she's actually thinking seriously about, how do I hold the realm together? She takes her duty incredibly seriously. There have been very few indicators that this is who Rhaenyra is the entire show. So that gap in time is really a problem. If you saw the transition over a small gap in time where maybe her father's death changes her, right? Maybe they start the season when she's an adult. And she is irresponsible, right? She married her uncle. By the way, they make some moves in the show deliberately in order to make Rhaenyra not totally unlikable that are not in the book. So, for example, her husband gets dispatched with alacrity, my understanding is, in the book. In this one, they sort of exile him with his gay lover, which 100% would not happen in an ancient kingdom. I'm sorry, not a real thing. And also, why would Daemon go along with that? Daemon's one of those brutal characters in the show, and he's like, no, we must allow this gay couple to escape to another country. The transition in Rhaenyra makes no sense. This is paralleled by the transition in Alicent. So Alicent, played as a young woman by Emily Carey in a very good performance, and then Olivia Cook, who also gives a good performance. But they're 2 separate characters. Okay, so Emily Carey, when she is young, is virtue-driven, duty-bound, right? She's supposed to contrast with Rhaenyra, who's headstrong and emotion-bound, and Emily is doing exactly what her dad says, which makes her, by the way, a better regent in many ways than Rhaenyra would be. Rhaenyra would be unpredictable, she would do volatile things. Alicent is going to do what she thinks is best for the realm. And so she goes to Viserys, and she's the one who has to take on all the duties. I mean, she's like a kid. She's 16, 17 years old, and she's forced into an arranged marriage with this 45-year-old king, who's kind of gross. And then she's having babies by him, presumably to solidify the line of the kingdom. And meanwhile, Viserys is still sticking with Rhaenyra for no reason that you can really imagine. Like, his failure to just decrown Rhaenyra and put it on Aegon in the first place is very weird. It's very strange. If Viserys' thing is, I want to maintain the kingdom, the thing he ought to do is that, right? But he doesn't do that. Instead, he sticks with Rhaenyra, which, again, weird decision by Viserys. But to get back to Alicent, she is innocent. She is forced into this position by her dad. by the time we get to the second half of the show, she has turned into one of the worst characters in the show. Now she is scheming and conniving and terrible. And she's doing all of this, presumably in order to crown her kids, in order to preserve their lives, not because she wants to unify the kingdom or thinks that that's a good idea, but because she's afraid that Rhaenyra is going to kill all of her kids, but she knows Rhaenyra. In fact, she appeals to Rhaenyra's sense of justice at the end of the show. So again, none of that makes a whole hell of a lot. And she becomes incredibly corrupt. By the end of the show, she's like sitting there and giving foot fetish pleasure to Larys Strong. Right? Like, none of that makes any sense. So she goes from a courageous and dutiful person standing up for her family and maybe for the good of the realm to a conniving, scheming person, all of whose children are terrible, by the way. Right? All of her kids are awful. For some reason, Rhaenyra ended up with like amazing kids, and Alicent ended up with horrible kids, which is weird because Alicent seems to be much more involved with her kids than Rhaenyra is, but never mind you that. Okay, then you get to the Valyrians. The real problem with the Valyrians is that Rhaenys obviously should be the queen. She has the best qualities. She actually thinks strategically. She knows what she is doing. And maybe that's one of the points of the show, is that Viserys never should have been the king, that Rhaenys should have been the queen in the first place. Again, she's constantly making decisions that are convenient for the writers. So at the very end of episode 9, for example, she bursts through the floor with her dragon, killing probably 1,000 commoners, but doesn't just fry the royal family and end the war. Why? She says, well, it's not my war to start. Well, it's your war to end, though. There are a few things you could do here. One thing that you could do, considering that you actually do have a claim to the throne and you have a giant-ass dragon and you're the only person in the entire kingdom, apparently, who knows that the crown has now been stolen, you could theoretically fry the Alicent side of the royal family, and then you could actually go to your husband and start a war for the crown yourself. Instead, you fly to Rhaenyra and pledge your loyalty to what end exactly? On behalf of grandkids who actually have no relationship with you genetically? It's a very strange move. All of this is very strange. Same thing with Lord Corlys, right, who starts off the show as a very ambitious guy who's interested maybe in the crown himself, and starts a war with Daemon in order to wrest control away from Viserys in some ways. And by the end of the show, he's bending the knee to Rhaenyra. Again, for no apparent reason, considering that, as is pointed out, both Corlys and Rhaenys think that Rhaenyra killed one of their sons and burned his body. Okay, meanwhile, I know that we're supposed to hate Criston Cole because Criston Cole is emotional and bad and all of this, but Criston Cole is pretty badly abused by Rhaenyra. I know that we're just glossing over this because Rhaenyra is supposed to be the heroine of the piece. Criston Cole is used the way he says he is used, and we're supposed to believe that because he's devoted to virtue, this means that he is bad. But I'm going to go counter the crowd here and say that early on, Criston Cole is not the problem. Rhaenyra is the problem. Later on, of course, he becomes the problem. Him, basically pointing out that Rhaenyra is terrible, that's true for 95% of the show, except for the last 5% of the show. Otto Hightower begins the show as sort of the manipulative hand, and the idea is that he wants power for himself, but that originally is not his motivation. Originally, his motivation is the kingdom is going to split apart if you name a girl. And so we need a son. And then he gets a son, and he promotes the son. By the end, it's I just want power myself. When does that transition exactly happen for Otto? You don't really see it. This is just one of the big problems of the show, is that the lack of character consistency means that it's very hard to root hard for anybody. You got Daemon, who's all over the place. You got Rhaenyra, who's all over the place. You've got Alicent, who's all over the place. The only one who's consistent is Viserys, just because he seems to be wobbly the whole time. So this is a problem. Okay, so finally, you get to the end of the show, and Aemond, who has been sort of prepping for the kingship, right? They make it clear he's been studying philosophy and he's been studying history, and he is a badass because he's claimed a dragon of his own without anybody's permission. Plus, he has a cool pirate patch and everything. He shows up at the Baratheon in order to woo the Baratheons for the war. Lucerys shows up, the son of Rhaenyra, and Lucerys is supposed to woo the Baratheons. And Aemond is pissed because he's still missing his eye. He taunts Lucerys, and then he chases him out of the hall, and he chases him down in the dragon. Okay, there's a major mistake that's made in this particular scene, and it's not indicated, my understanding is, in the book. And the major mistake that is made here is that of all the youngsters, it seems that the only two who are qualified to be king at all, just in terms of personality, are Jacaerys and Aemon. Right? Aegon, the second, is garbage and running away from his job, and which means that he will be dispatched, I would imagine, right quickly next season. Lucerys has really no claim to the throne, considering that he's illegitimate, and neither does Jacaerys. Aemond actually has a claim to the throne. He also happens to have been studying. He's a good warrior. We know that he's very clever. We know that he actually has the ability to hold himself back. He's not a profligate. And so suddenly in this last scene, he's played as wildly angry. What he should be is extraordinarily calculating. He should be thinking, okay, well, if this thing gets settled, then my claim to the throne is going to be essentially in question forever. What I need is a pathway to the throne. And the way I'm going to get a pathway to the throne is maybe a war. because I'm not getting a pathway to the throne any other way, so maybe I need a war here. And so I'm going to lead off this war by killing this kid who took my eye years and years and years ago. And so he should coldly and in calculating fashion chase down Lucerys and kill him. You should be hating Aemond, but you should also be sort of admiring the fact that he's coldly calculating. Instead, you get this weird dynamic where in the very last scene, the dragons get in a fight, but both riders don't actually want to be in the fight, right? Where Lucerys is trying to stop his dragon from attacking the other dragon. And he's like, no, no, no. But he's bad at controlling the dragon, so the dragon shoots the other dragon with fire. And then the giant-ass dragon that Aemond is riding is like, chomp, and just eats small dragon along with Lucerys. And Aemond is like, oh, no. What have I? Oh, no. And like, why, though? That's totally out of character. Suddenly, he has, like, conflicting feelings about killing members of the family? Since when? That's confusing. Bottom line, for the first season of House of the Dragon, we need clearer characterization. We need to know who we are rooting for. We need to know why they've developed in the way that they have. Many of the problems here, as I say, could have been avoided by simply starting the season with the second half of the season. So they actually learn to be interested in the backstories of these characters. Like, it'd be cool to find out the revelation that Daemon once had designs on the throne. It'd be cool to find out that Aemond's eye was taken by Lucerys. Not you watch them do the Six Kids, but, like, that's why they hate each other. It would be cool to find all this out in the context of almost a stage play, which is really what the first season is. Instead, because of that divide in the season, you kind of start to identify with these characters, and then they shift forward 10 years in time. They recast half the cast, and they change the characters of half the cast. And they make a bunch of kind of simple, stupid writing choices that get them out of trouble in one area, only to create trouble in another area. Rhaenys not blowing up the entire Alicent Hightower side of the family. And these are just bad writing decisions and sloppy writing in order to get them out of a problem, which is, what do? Oh, we'll have her bust through with the dragon. Why? I don't know. It'd be cool. It's hard to get over the chasm in the internal logic of the show. In fact, this season seems to be written more like Game of Thrones Season 5 than Game of Thrones Season 1. And Game of Thrones Season 1 is very tightly written because it was all plotted out by George R.R. Martin. But this season seems to be plotted out by the TV writers, and this means that they rely on a bunch of kind of silly tropes to get by. Overall, out of 5 swords, I will give Game of Thrones House of the Dragon Season 1 3.5 swords. Could have been 5, it wasn't.